All right. Are we ready?
Yeah, we're good to go.
Everybody's ready? Okay, good. Thank you all for being here. This is, once again, the District Attorney's Office's Monday morning press conference in which we do two things. We address in some way the issue of gun violence during the prior week, and then we also talk about either a unit within the office, an important initiative, or an important case relating to our work. This week, what we'll be talking about is something that we consider to be one of our proudest achievements, something that in many ways points an arrow towards the future in criminal justice, not only in Philadelphia, but around the country. And when I say around the country, I mean it's something that is going on in different ways already in San Francisco, in Los Angeles, in Durham, North Carolina, in Nashville, Tennessee, in Contra Costa County, California, which is just south of San Francisco, in Miami, and in several other jurisdictions. There are about 15 jurisdictions in the United States where something like this is going on. What I'm talking about is restorative justice. It is accountability, but it is accountability that has more imagination than simply to punish. And it's a kind of accountability that studies have shown not only reduces future criminal conduct, but is more satisfactory to victims of crime than what we have been doing traditionally. So I am thrilled to have that be our topic today, and we'll speak more about it in a moment. I'd like to start out by acknowledging some of the people who are here. We have with us today Robert Listonbee, who is the first assistant district attorney, a man whose life has largely been dedicated to juvenile justice, and appropriately so, because what we're about to describe here in terms of restorative justice begins with juveniles. We have with us ADA Chesley Lightsey, the chief of the Homicide and Non-Fatal Shooting Unit. We have Reverend Myra Maxwell, who is the supervisor of the DAO's CARES program. ADA Jordan King is here. He is the supervisor of the Juvenile Diversion Unit in the District Attorney's Office. We have Jody Dodd, who is the DAO's Restorative Justice Facilitator, and this might be her proudest day since she came to the DA's office. She's had a lot of proud days in her life, but this might be her proudest day since she came to the DA's office, because this has been her dream. Her position was essentially created out of the enthusiasm we all had about this, but out of her specific enthusiasm to make this her mission in the DA's office. And yes, we did. We actually got here. We also have with us Christina Bradley, Director of the Juvenile Social Services Unit of the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office, formerly served in a similar capacity at the Public Defender's Office, another person whose entire career has been dedicated to juvenile justice in one way or another. We have Council Member Jamie Gauthier of the 3rd Councilmanic District, and also Council Member Helen Gim, who is an at-large member of City Council, both of whom have made it quite clear that a tremendous emphasis of their careers is juvenile justice and education. We also have the Reverend Dr. Donna Jones, who is a pastor at the Cookman Beloved Community Baptist Church and plays, well, she wears a couple different hats when it comes to restorative justice, and we're very excited to hear from Reverend Donna Jones. And we also have Reverend Gregory Holston, who is a senior advisor in the District Attorney's Office and a pastor, has worn a lot of hats as well, including hats very close to what we will talk about today in terms of restorative justice. Let me turn briefly, if I may, to speak about gun violence. This weekend, we suffered another painful period in which we saw real people being harmed in ways that not only affected them, but terribly affected their families and affected their neighborhoods and their communities. It has been said that gun violence and violent crime spreads in a way that is viral. That's not my opinion. That's the opinion of a criminologist. That if you are around it enough, if you suffer that trauma directly or indirectly enough, it spreads and is liable to be repeated, even by people who've been traumatized by it. And that's part of the reason it is so heartbreaking to go over these incidents time and time again. But that is actually what you do in the District Attorney's Office. When police have succeeded in obtaining enough evidence to make an arrest, you go over these over and over and over. Nobody knows that better than Chesley Lightsey from our office. But let me just give you, if I may, let me just give you a few examples of what we dealt with this weekend. So on Friday, July the 9th, at about 7:20 p.m., a 20-year-old black male, a 32-year-old Hispanic male, and a 33-year-old black male were all shot in a triple shooting on the 2900 block of Frankfurt Avenue in the 24th District. All of these victims were transported to Temple Hospital, where they were placed in stable condition. This is an ongoing investigation. No arrest has been made at this time. Anyone with information related to this incident, please contact the East Detective Division. Excuse me. Please contact the East Detective Division at 215-686-3244. A couple of hours later, on Friday, July the 9th, a 16-year-old black male was shot once in the right hand at 59th and Master in the 19th Police District. He transported himself to Lankenau Hospital, where he was placed in stable condition. This, too, remains an ongoing investigation, and no arrest has been made by PPD at this time. Anyone with information about the incident should contact Southwest Detective Division at 215-686-3184. And on Sunday, the 11th of July, at about 11:50 p.m., 5 males were shot in a quintuple shooting. Some were shot multiple times on the 900 block of Butler Street in the 25th Police District. They were all transported to Temple Hospital by private vehicles and were all placed in stable condition. Once again, this remains an active investigation. Anyone with information related to the incident should contact the East Detective Division at 215-686-3244. I would now like to invite the Reverend Myra Maxwell, who is the head of our CARES unit. As many of you know, the CARES unit is a unit that came into existence during this administration, just as our Restorative Justice unit came into existence during this administration. Reverend Myra Maxwell has done incredible work in providing support to survivors of homicide, co-victims of homicide, the families of homicide victims, often almost from the instant of the killing itself. That work is very important, and I'd like to invite her to come forward to say a couple words. After that, we will be switching to our other topic. Reverend?
Thank you, D.A. Krasner, and good morning, everyone. I want to start by making this simple statement, and I think we all agree. Where there's violence, there's victims. In our city, we've experienced, of course, we've heard from D.A. Krasner that there's been an increase in gun violence, but there's an increase in violence completely all around us. And we'd like to talk to you about our direct and indirect victims of violence. Many of you feel as though there are services that are not available to indirect victims, but I want to encourage you and let you know that there are services available in the city of Philadelphia that have worked specifically around issues of victimization with both direct, which means family members or the person who's actually been injured themselves, but also with those who are impacted in our communities, survivors of homicide specifically, and as well as other types of folks that are impacted by violent crime. In our city, we have community-based victim service agencies. We have one that's called the Philly 6, and those are your 6 community-based organizations that are located particularly around our detective divisions. So in each section of our city, there's someone that will assist direct and indirect victims of violence, crimes, or crime in general, and that will assist you with your VCAP, counseling support, and other services. I want to make sure that you realize all of the services that are provided are free. We also have survivor-led organizations that work with surviving family members and community members impacted by homicide. So when we look at the homicide numbers, we see that they have increased. But we have no way of knowing who the indirect victims are unless they reach out to us. So we want to encourage anyone who's experiencing any impact or trauma related to homicide, related to gun violence in our city, that you reach out to our office, and you can give us a call at 215-686-8019, and we'll be able to direct you to the services and supports in your community. Again, this is really important because we are all impacted by violence. We all are experiencing levels of trauma, and I think that this is a way that we can help to assist those who may think that they are unable or services not readily available for them. I do want to make one announcement that we are starting our CARES hotline, which the DA mentioned some time ago. So that will be operational as of Friday, and that number will be 215-275-7937. I'll repeat that. The CARES hotline will be 215-275-7937, and this hotline is available for those who will be able to reach out for those who are impacted by homicide. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Reverend Maxwell. So obviously accountability can come in different forms. And the nature of individual justice is that it recognizes that accountability may vary based upon the severity of the crime, based upon the record of the person who is accused of that crime. Shooters are facing accountability in this administration, and they are facing accountability not only in terms of a very high rate of conviction, but also in terms of the consequences, which are the ones you would expect. They include incarceration, and they include lengthy incarceration in situations where the record is lengthy or where the consequences are severe. There is a jail cell waiting for people who paralyze other people. There's also accountability that comes in mediation in much less serious matters. So, for example, we have a private criminal complaint unit that often mediates disputes between neighbors. That might not sound important, but Chesley Lightsey will tell you that when you get your next homicide in a fight between neighbors over a parking spot, that it's a lot more important than it may seem. And so accountability also can sometimes prevent violence. It can prevent the trauma that can come with that. We also have accountability through diversion. Sometimes people think accountability is a word that simply means punishment. Well, sadly, it may have meant that way too long in the United States. But there is a way that is actually far more effective, which is in the appropriate case for there to be accountability, for there to be an accounting, a reckoning, doing what you got to do to make up for what you did wrong. That does not permanently mark you as someone who cannot participate in the economy. It does not permanently mark you as someone who cannot own a home and cannot be a provider and cannot go to school and cannot get a loan and cannot. I could go on and on, but you all know exactly what I'm talking about, and that is what happens when we take people whose crimes are not so severe, who are involved in them when they're young, and we mark them forever so that they cannot participate in our economy. It hurts all of us, and it drives people towards crime instead of away from it. But I'm not actually here to talk about any of those three. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk about accountability through restorative justice. It has been a vision of this office from before we were in office to make restorative justice a part of what we were trying to do here. In 2017, I was sitting in a coffee shop somewhere in the Bay Area, I can't remember where, with a woman named Sujata Baliga. And if you'd like the spelling, I'll give it to you. S-U-J-A-T-H-A, and Baliga is B-A-L-I-G-A. You may have heard this name because since 2017, she's been awarded a MacArthur Genius Award for her work. And her work has been all about restorative justice. At that time, she was working for something called Impact Justice out of Oakland, California. And Impact Justice had engaged in a fascinating experiment with restorative justice, which basically went like this. You get, and I'll give the short version because we got a better version coming from people who know more. You get the young person who is responsible for a criminal act in a room with the victim. And what comes out of that is a contract. And the contract includes accountability. It includes what this young person is going to do to make it up to the person who was harmed, but also to get on a better track, because so many victims, so many survivors want more than anything that the person who did something against them not do it again, that they not do that to another person in the future. Well, what they found after 7 years of doing this in Oakland was not only there was a much lower rate of these young people committing additional crimes, but there was a much higher level of satisfaction among the victims who had learned all sorts of information they wouldn't get by just going through a traditional juvenile court process, who felt like they had been part of a solution and in many instances formed a kind of connection that gave them closure as to what had happened in their particular case. I'll let others speak in more detail about it. But I was sitting in that coffee shop in 2017 before we were in office for a couple reasons. One was we wanted this to be part of what we did, but Sujata has a unique connection to Philadelphia. She was a student at the University of Pennsylvania. She grew up in Pennsylvania. And when I first met her, she was just a bright young student working in my office, my law office. She also worked in my wife's judicial office at that time, and then went on to do these amazing things. And as we talked about it, we realized what a challenge it is to bring to a city where many district attorneys, many assistant DAs had never heard the phrase restorative justice. Restorative justice. Well, thank goodness Jody Dodd jumped up. Jody said early on that if she was coming into this office after a career that I would say is fairly characterized as being about nonviolent social change and about social justice through activism. She said if she was coming into the office, then she wanted to be the restorative justice facilitator. And that is exactly what she became. And so we embarked on a process. That process involved quite some time spent dealing with impact justice. It involved impact justice going and lining up funders. Our office lined up a small funder as well through a group called Spring Point. It involved the careful vetting of a few different candidate organizations who would conduct the restorative justice process. We eventually landed on YASP, YASP, and we're happy to have done so. This is something that took a while, but was initiated by the district attorney's office because we thought it was so important, not just for juveniles, but potentially for young adults and potentially for everyone in the system. It really is a different form of accountability that does not disable society and does not leave America where it has been, with all of its money being burned up on punishment and retribution as opposed to things that actually work. So we were hopeful that this would all kick off about a year ago, and then the pandemic hit. I'm thrilled to tell you that the many steps in the process, and I'm sure that Jody Dodd and others, Reverend Donna Jones, First Assistant Listonbee, will speak to it, but the many steps in the process are complete. We have families at this time who are being prepared for the session itself. I'll let others explain exactly how that works. But we're very proud of this pilot program. It is going to involve 25 defendants in the first year, and it's my hope that we will be able to see that it is successful, and if so, then we will be able to expand it. And I mean expand it dramatically. I'm not talking going 25 to 30. I would love to see this go from 25 to 250 as soon as it can. And then I'd like to see it go to 2,500. Because when you got 40,000 cases a year, there's some cases that could be resolved in this fashion. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce in the following order, and I'm not going to jump up in between their input. First, we will have ADA Jordan King, who is the supervisor of the DAO's Juvenile Diversion Unit, speak about the DAO's Juvenile Restorative Justice Initiative. Among other things, he'll talk about how cases were selected as being appropriate for this process. We will then have Jody Dodd, who is the DAO's Restorative Justice Facilitator, will provide a lot of interesting details about our work and our partnership with YASP here. Jody will be introducing the Reverend Dr. Donna Jones. We will then hear from the Reverend Dr. Donna Jones, who is going to introduce a couple people, Raheem Washington and Kirsten Britt, who have some pretty interesting things to say. And Reverend Jones will speak about the MCCP, the Metropolitan Christian Council of Philadelphia's Restorative Justice Program. She'll also talk about the Restorative Cities Initiative, which is part of that. And finally, among the non-elected official crew, we will hear from First Assistant Bob Listonbee, who, as many of you know, was heavily involved in this initiative and obtaining some of the initial funding, but was also the Director of Juvenile Justice for the United States of America for Barack Obama in his second term before he came to work with us. And once that is concluded, I'll get up again. I'll introduce two wonderful elected officials who have graced us with their presence and have important things to say, and then we will go to questions. So, I'd like to call forward ADA Jordan King.
Thank you, Mr. Krasner, and good morning, everyone. My name is Jordan King, and I'm the Director of Juvenile Diversion Programs at the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. The Juvenile Diversion Unit's goals are to hold youth accountable, increase community safety, promote victim restoration, and facilitate youth redemption within a developmentally appropriate framework that prioritizes progress over perfection. We're honored to partner with Impact Justice and the Youth Arts and Self-Empowerment Project to pilot Philadelphia's first pre-charge restorative justice program for youth with high-level crimes and cases with identifiable victims. These are cases that would traditionally end in placement or periods of extended probation. I will spend the next few minutes providing an overview of the Restorative Justice Diversion Program, highlighting its role in the juvenile justice system, explaining the District Attorney's Office's role in the process, and then we'll hear from Restorative Justice Facilitator Jody Dodd. The philosophy of restorative justice says that getting justice means repairing harm. In fact, Pennsylvania's juvenile justice system has emphasized accountability and the mitigation of harms through the barge principles. These are the balanced and restorative justice principles that were incorporated by Act 33 in 1995. Our Restorative Justice Diversion program is a program that young people undertake to repair the harm to the person who is harmed, to the youth's family and caregiver, to the community at large, and to the youth themselves. This process brings together each of these parties to facilitate face-to-face dialogues to ensure that all parties reach consensus about what steps need to be taken to ensure that the program meets the needs of the person who is harmed, while also supporting the positive development of the young person. So how does it work? If the young person is willing to take responsibility and participate in the program, the facilitator then meets with the victim to find out how they've been impacted and what they need moving forward. Please note that at this time, though we do take high-level offense types, including felonies and misdemeanors of the first degree, we currently do not have the resources to take youth with certain offense types. At this time for this pilot, we are not currently taking cases that have firearm offenses or any offenses that would qualify for a direct file offense. So once the youth commits and takes responsibility for their actions, then the facilitator prepares each participant for a restorative community conference, helping each party to process what happened and to figure out what repairing the harm could look like. Once the young person successfully completes the program and takes steps to repair the harm, the district attorney's office will consider the case resolved and no charges will be filed. If the restorative justice program returns the case without completion, the district attorney's office can still process the case in the traditional manner, but without utilizing any of the information gathered during the process as evidence against that young person. Restorative justice diversion works. Impact Justice is currently working with restorative justice programs in over 15 counties across the country. As the district attorney mentioned, they're working currently in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Contra Costa County, Alameda County, Durham, Davidson, Miami-Dade County, and other jurisdictions. A 2017 study of Community Works West Restorative Justice Community Conferencing Program in Alameda County documents the effectiveness of the program by highlighting, first, that it reduces criminalization, second, that it lowers recidivism rates. Participating youth in this program were 44% less likely to recidivate compared to similarly situated probationary youth. The study highlighted satisfaction among those who were harmed. 91% of victims indicated that they would recommend the program to a loved one who found themselves in a similar situation. The study highlighted the cost effectiveness of the program, and the study highlighted the benefits in terms of family connectedness. 75% of participating young people indicated that the process had a good impact on their family relationship. 80% of participating guardians indicated that their child talked to them more after completing the process. So why does this work? First, because it's rooted in the community in which the harm was caused. Second, because the process facilitates accountability, open dialogue, and moral reasoning. And third, victims are at the helm of this survivor-centered process. At its core, diversion hinges on accountability, open dialogue, and moral reasoning. If young people are willing to take responsibility for their actions and undergo a moral reasoning discussion with the survivor of the incident and with the community at large, they're offered an opportunity to repair that harm while avoiding a juvenile record and the collateral consequences and stigma that can come from juvenile justice system involvement. When I say survivor-centered, I mean that the focus of the restorative justice diversion process is now on harm repair. These conferences have been found to alleviate symptoms of post-traumatic stress associated with victimization. As I previously mentioned, 91% of survivors indicate that they would recommend this process to a loved one who found themselves in a similar situation. And this can be largely attributed to the fact that these conferences are victim-oriented, whereby the person harmed, as opposed to a judge, is instrumental in holding the young person accountable. We recognize that the promotion of youth accountability, community safety, victim restoration, and youth redemption requires that we work with community-based experts to reduce barriers to success, and these generally come in the forms of the social determinants of health, adverse childhood experiences, and other impacting factors. We're sensitive to the unique needs of victims. We strive to communicate transparently, responsively, and in a manner that is always in line with the Victims' Bill of Rights. We're honored to collaborate with an organization that is as passionate, experienced, and relatable and dedicated as the Youth Arts and Self-Empowerment Project, and we're fortunate to be working under the guidance and expertise of Impact Justice. And we appreciate the community's assistance and support in helping us achieve balance and restorative justice. I'm now delighted to introduce our restorative justice facilitator, Jody Donna.
Good morning, everyone. I feel like Jordan just explained everything. It's like, what else is there to say? Other than this is a project that, as Larry mentioned, has been a passion of mine for many years. I worked with an international women's organization around human rights and social justice and had the privilege of working with women around the world who've used this process in civil war for reconciliation and healing to move forward This methodology is very old. It has been used in indigenous communities for many, many years, hundreds of years, and is emerged in the criminal justice world originally in the New Zealand with the Maori people who've advocated for this. So this is a process that's used in Europe, around the world, and indeed in this country has existed in other jurisdictions for over 10 years now. And so I'm delighted that Philadelphia has joined in this process and with these communities of restorative justice facilitators. As Larry mentioned, we've worked very closely with Impact Justice, who have guided us in developing the model here, supported us, provided the training for both our office and for YASP, our chosen partner in this work, and we'll continue to work with this, which is one of the reasons I think they're so impressive, for 6 years. After the 5th year of this work going forward with us, they will do a report on restorative justice here in Philadelphia. In addition to this work, I've been delighted to work with Reverend Donna Jones in imagining and reimagining Philadelphia as a restorative city. These initiatives are also happening around the country, with most recently Arlington, Virginia, having passed a resolution through their city council to make their city a restorative city, that I was delighted to be a reader on their project. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Reverend Donna Jones, who I consider my kindred spirit in the world of restorative justice and my partner in us creating a restorative city for Philadelphia.
Good afternoon. I want to thank DA Krasner and the DA's team, my dear friend Jody Dodd and Greg Holston, and others who are here. I'm here representing the Metropolitan Christian Council of Philadelphia, and I'd like to share a Philadelphia story. Metropolitan Christian Council of Philadelphia, in about 2018, we were reforming, like many small nonprofits across the city. We were doing what many nonprofits and individuals in our city do, trying to identify the needs that are in our own community, and our community is right here, and our community is throughout the city. In looking at our community, we determined that one of the things that wasn't being offered was a coordinated approach to all of the good work that was being done all around us. And it's not for lack of trying, it's often just because the information wasn't there. So we made a commitment to begin the Restorative Cities Initiative, because what we saw was Philadelphia burgeoning into a restorative city. We had already started to look at the work in Arlington, Virginia, and to look at the work in other cities across the nation, and we're Philadelphians, and we were like, we should do that here, not realizing that there were other organizations in Philadelphia also looking at it. And so we did what we do at the grassroots level. We started to get the education ourselves. We started to get training. We started to attract people that had already were restorative practitioners in our community and in our neighborhoods. And then we reached out, and in that reaching out, we talked with our friend Greg Holston, who is a member of Black Clergy of Philadelphia, and myself too. So in talking to Greg, and when the fullness of time had come, he's now working for the district attorney. And he has a friend, Troy Wilson, who's a member and a citizen of Philadelphia who happens to be an attorney. He too is working on restorative solutions. And then we reached out to SARE Community Center, and people like Kirsten and Raheem, who are also working on this. Why am I excited about this? I'm as excited as Jody Dodd, because the vision of the Restorative Cities Initiative, from MCCP's part, we are community organizers, advocates, trainers, and coaches in the area of restorative justice and in building restorative cities. And it makes my job so much easier when the district attorney's office and staff, when other offices, when nonprofits and people are all at the same time having the same vision in various places. And the only thing people like myself and Jody and others are doing is we're just connecting people like ourselves and Jody and others. And that gives me great hope. We hear all the time about the homicide rate. We hear all the time about all of these things, but that is not representative of all of Philadelphia. And the good news is, by working these restorative options and by taking the risk, and it is a risk, our first thought whenever anything happens is lock them up. I'm telling you right now, as an African-American woman, clergy in the city, how's it working for you? Because somebody gets locked up, what happens with the family, the children? What happens to everybody? Restorative solutions take a bit of patience and a bit of time, but they're deep and they go deep. And they go from the porch to City Hall. And as we look at all of these this is a collaborative approach involving many systems to ensure that the youngest to the eldest are safe in our city and receive fairness, receive justice. And one of the groups that we're reaching out and working with is the wonderful people down at Sayre Community Center. So I'd like to invite Kirsten and Raheem to come forward, because there's a saying of another Philadelphian out of Eastern University, nothing about them without them. So they're here to talk about the young people's work along with MCCP and others in Philadelphia becoming a restorative city.
Thank you, Reverend Donna. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kirsten Britt. I am the Associate Director of Outreach at Sayre Health Center and also at the Sayre Community Center. It is a pleasure and an honor for us to partner with MCCP and through MCCP, the DA's office, and other agencies that recognize that this work is important. Why is it important? Because there are other alternatives to our children dying in the streets. There are other alternatives to our young people being housed at Juvenile Justice Center. We can do something different, and we have this unique opportunity to do that. I was overexcited when I got the opportunity to meet Reverend Donna and talk about this work through our partnership with Life Outside the Streets. And we were able to just design, get an opportunity to partake in designing the curricula for young people. So Raheem is going to speak to that a little bit, because it's not only important to have this work, but it's important for the young people to have a voice in it. And so too often we make decisions without including the people that decisions are being made for. It is important for young people to be able to see that agencies like the DA's office trust them. They trust their voice, they hear their voice, they hear them as responsible young people who can make decisions for themselves and with each other. And I think that this is just a unique opportunity that the city has to speak differently to our young people. And so I'm very, very, very excited to be a part of this partnership, and I'm gonna allow Raheem Washington, who is one of our senior outreach specialists at Sayre Health Center and at the Community Center, to speak to the work that he has been doing over the last couple of weeks.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Raheem Washington, as Ms. Britt said, where I work alongside the Community Center and Sayre Health Center. And we're here just to say thank you first to DA Krasner and Reverend Jones for allowing us to be here to share this time and space with you all to talk about the community and what the youth's involvement and voice means towards the community. So in my opinion, the youth's voice in the community means a lot. There was an old saying that it used to take a village to raise a child. So that's the importance of the community, to go back and recite to those original terms and meanings, to go back and help the community. Now, the youth's important voice in the community starts with allowing them to venture out and explain why these things are happening and what is it affecting them. We may not have a physical effect on some with the violence. However, there's a mental aspect that we do not touch upon. There's things like PTSD that their child doesn't feel okay to talk about because it's not something that usually goes on in the community. They feel like an outcast in that environment. However, the Community Center and Reverend Jones, we are trying to apply methods and opportunities for these youth to speak out and just come along and be together, whether that's through video games, that's something that the youth has in a lot of involvement with now, whether that's through sports, and whether that's through school or education. So I feel like the Community Center, as well as the Health Center's role in that, is to facilitate and allow the functions to move in a smooth manner. And I also feel like the youth is important because they are our future. And our future starts with the youth. Education, physical, and mental. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Bob Listonbee. And when I joined the district attorney's office, the first thing DA Krasner told me was that he wanted to have a restorative justice program as a part of his juvenile justice reform initiative. Now, he was clear from the start. He was clear from the start that he wanted to begin with juveniles, but he wanted to move forward and also address emerging adults and eventually move this system, this pilot program, into the adult system. You've heard today from a variety of experts about how successful restorative justice programs have been in other communities. They're victim or survivor-centered. The satisfaction from those who have participated, who were victims of crime, is very high. The fact that criminalization or criminal behavior by juveniles is reduced significantly. Recidivism is reduced significantly. And many other factors that have already been outlined. These are good reasons to move forward with a restorative justice program. Now, the DA has said from the beginning it might take some time to do it. But I know this. When I first heard about restorative justice programs in 1995 as a part of the Balanced and Restorative Justice program, they told us it was coming to Philadelphia then as a part of the criminal justice reform process. It didn't come. In 2003, when we went to Europe, we went to London to look at restorative justice programs that were being used in New Zealand and Australia, and we were told then that they would come to our system here in Philadelphia, but they did not come. So when the DA told me he was committed, no matter what it took, no matter how much effort, no matter how many resources it took, that we were going to do it. I know Sujata Baliga. I had the opportunity to work with her for a year as a part of the Attorney General's National Task Force on Children's Exposure to Violence. I know she, too, is a visionary like D.A. Krasner. So I was excited and thrilled to join this operation. I'm thrilled now. I want you to know one other thing. We do continue to hold youth in the juvenile justice system accountable. We have reduced the numbers in out-of-home placement from over 600 to down near about 115. But young people who are engaged in guns, with guns and shootings and violence with guns, they're still being held at the Philadelphia Juvenile Justice Services Center. And they're also still going to out-of-home placement. We need better placements closer to home. But we still have to hold them accountable because of the extreme violence they're involved in. We still take serious cases, however, in this program. I want that distinction to be noted. So again, D.A. Krasner remains committed. We want to thank Impact Justice. We want to thank Spring Point. We want to thank Jody Dodd and all the others who've been involved here, Reverend Jones and the team that's been involved here as well, because we want to be a part of the community effort. Without the community, we couldn't do this. Without a community group, we could not do this. It was clear from the beginning that we had to engage the community. So that's what we're doing now. We look forward to working with YASP and in the future with other community groups as well. So we're just getting started. We want as much support from the community as we can possibly get, but we also want people to recognize that we're taking it one step at a time. I carefully review all the cases with Jordan and others in the juvenile justice system to make sure the right cases are the ones we start off with. So thank you again. A pleasure to have you here. We look forward to having you involved further with restorative justice. Thank you.
Thank you all, and thank you, Mr. Listonbee. So without much delay, I would like to introduce two very strong leaders in City Council who during their careers have made it clear that they have no higher priority than youth and education, that they understand the monumental importance of a proper education and proper opportunities for young people. They are, in this order, Councilmember Helen Gim and Councilmember Jamie Gauthier. I'll have a couple more words to say because I think that what is happening here is not only significant for juvenile, but I think it actually goes to the core of what has been wrong with criminal justice in the United States for quite some time. And that is the cracked foundation of our criminal justice, which is the belief that there are only two types of people in the world, ones who are bad forever, ones who are good forever, and that no one changes. There's not a single person in this room believes no one changes, because every single person in this room has changed in their own life. But that is really ultimately what this is about. And that's why it is first and most immediately about juveniles, but it is about young adults, and it is about all of us in a city that has 40,000 criminal matters a year. Without further ado, I'd like to invite forward Councilmember Helen Gim, and then I will not interrupt when Councilmember Gauthier comes forward after that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, District Attorney Krasner, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm Helen Gim, City Council Member at Large, Chair of Children and Youth. There was a point in time when Pennsylvania was known throughout the country as the state with the largest number of young people sentenced to life without parole in Pennsylvania prisons. Today, that trajectory changes. I want to thank District Attorney Krasner. I want to thank the commitment of Jody Dodd, Reverend Jones, and so many others who are here today to say that young people in this country, and particularly here in the city of Philadelphia, have a different course that's before them. You know, I know a lot has been said about the Restorative Justice Program, and there will be time for that to unfold, and I urge the media who are here today to follow these young people, these 25 young people through the system to show how things are different. But I am also here to talk about how the current system of juvenile justice is completely broken. For the last 18 months, I've spent time on the governor's task force on juvenile justice reforms. We visited Pennsylvania juvenile detention centers all across the state. We've met with young people themselves. We've met with, as a group, with judges and prosecutors and others. One thing has been made very clear. We must keep young people out of the system, period. There is no process that exists right now in Pennsylvania where engagement with the formal system of the penal system in Pennsylvania is going to result in better outcomes for young people. We have data that shows it. We've got young people that show it. We have people who understand it. The problem is we cannot create off-ramps for young people, especially black children, men, young boys and girls, black, brown, and immigrant youth here in the city, but also statewide. We cannot create off-ramps with them like we do with predominantly white youth or youth who live in wealthier cities and other municipalities. That's why this system matters, because we are actually creating a different process for young people. I want to acknowledge as well the tremendous work of YASP Philadelphia. We've been partnering with them to close down abusive detention centers. I started with Wordsworth, Glen Mills, Vision Quest. We can go on and on and on. We've also worked to end and eliminate fines and fees within the juvenile and child welfare systems. These are all important processes, and I look forward to working with the District Attorney's Office, my Children and Youth Committee, especially my wonderful partner, Jamie Gauthier, to take a look at young people on probation. The juvenile probation system is as punitive as the adult probation system. There's not an off-ramp for young people. It causes significant problems. It cuts off the avenues to work, to secondary or continued education. There will be a different way. That starts today. I look forward to having the city be a tremendous partner with the district attorney on this. And again, urge the media to continue to follow these young people through this path. You will hear radically different stories of young people who go through the system and young people who see off-ramps. The journeys are tremendously different, and I believe that the outcomes will be as well. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and I'm glad to welcome you here to the 3rd District today. My name is Councilmember Jamie Gauthier. I want to thank District Attorney Larry Krasner for bringing us all together today, and thank you also to my colleague, Helen Gim, for all of her important work in this area, as well as to Reverend Dr. Donna Jones for hosting us. Today's announcement is a perfect example of how Philadelphia benefits from having a progressive prosecutor. This office is centering the needs of our communities, of survivors of violence, and of our young people, and what's in the best interest for all of our futures. And that's why I'm so pleased that the Healing Futures program is officially getting off of the ground. Thank you to the Youth Art and Self-Empowerment Group for your leadership on this effort and for everything you do to connect with and advocate for our city's justice-involved young people. Restorative justice repairs the harm caused by crime. When victims, offenders, and community members meet to decide how to make those repairs happen, the results can be transformational. And that's why I'm so excited that Healing Futures is officially getting off of the ground today. As the district attorney mentioned, this is a first-in-the-nation program designed to achieve justice and accountability without exposing our young people to traditional prosecution and keep them out of the juvenile justice system. Efforts like this are an important tool in our toolbox to reduce our city's over-reliance on incarceration, especially for our young people who have their whole entire lives ahead of them. I am so grateful to the DA's office and to YASP for their work to make Philadelphia a restorative city. And I look forward to continuing to partner with all of you as this vital work continues. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you all for your patience. I just want to give you the car mechanic breakdown. Sometimes we talk about these things and all the terms are conceptual and you're trying to imagine what the heck we're talking about. Let me give you what my understanding of the system looks like in very concrete terms, and then we'll turn to your questions. So the way Philadelphia's system will work is cases will be spotted even before an arrest is made. When we have probable cause to indicate a valid arrest, and we have what is essentially a warrant waiting to be executed, this is the point at which Jordan King and others in the office are going to select the appropriate cases. They will not be the most serious cases in the office, but they will be serious cases. We don't need a system like this for a young person who steals bubble gum from the Wawa. And we're not going to use a system like this for someone who paralyzes another teenager by shooting him in the back of the head behind a dumpster. This is for cases, often felony cases, that are serious, but are in that range where restorative justice appears to us in this pilot program to be appropriate. So what do they look like? I'll give you an example that was told to me about a case in Oakland. You had a burglary. The person who owned the apartment was not home. She was out. When her place was burglarized, she came home. The door was broken. Window was broken. Her clothing had been gone through in her dresser. Perfume had been taken. Other things had been stolen from her premises. And it had the effect on a victim that you would expect, which is that when she came home the next day, her hand is shaken with the key because she's wondering if somebody is in there now. She had to scramble and miss a day of work to get people out to seal up the place, to protect herself. It cost her money that she wasn't expecting to have to put out. It's a violation. It has its own traumatic effect. Certainly not as traumatic as being stabbed or shot, but it had its own traumatic effect. And she ended up in a room with the young person who did it, face to face. And the deal went like this. If we come to a deal, this case is over. If we don't come to a deal, then this case will be prosecuted. What he said would not leave the room. What she said would not leave the room and be used for trial purposes, and she had plenty to say because she'd been through a lot, and he needed to hear it to understand the impact of what he had done. What he had to say was not, I never did it, because we don't even do the process if that's what it is. What he had to say explained his circumstances, what was going on at the time. It was not so much excuses as it was an explanation of what was going on at the time. And what came out of it was an individualized agreement. Instead of going to school 1 out of 5 days, he was going to have to go at least 4 out of 5 days, an improvement, but not perfect. Instead of her being on the hook for the part that was not covered by insurance for her deductible, he was going to get a job and was going to pay her $10 a week so that she could pay back the deductible. But there was more. It turned out she had found out, that he was a skilled painter. Something I saw during my career of representing a lot of juveniles is a remarkable level of artistic skill among people who are in trouble with the system. She found out he was a skilled painter. Well, she had a particular thing about Tinkerbell from her childhood. She loved Tinkerbell. So he was going to paint Tinkerbell for her. Agreement made. Agreement kept. And this is not just some hippie story about what might be, because this is one of many stories that became a study, and the study was quite clear. The study was that that young man was less likely to commit a future crime than if he had gone to juvenile court and gotten the usual outcome, which would have marked him in various different ways and potentially put him in a placement. And the story was that she was much more satisfied than most people who have been victimized in that circumstance, and having spent a lot of time in juvenile court as a public defender, as a defense attorney, and also now as a prosecutor, I know what that looks like. What it looks like is most of you wait outside a courtroom and you don't go in. Or if you do go in, it's only briefly, and then some fairly young attorney comes out and says, I have tremendous success for you. What's that? Well, he's been adjudicated delinquent. We found him not only guilty of the act, but adjudicated delinquent, and he's going to get some kind of probation, or he's going to go to some kind of placement. Well, believe it or not, that doesn't feel like such a victory to a lot of people who still don't know, why was this kid doing it? How can we stop him from doing it in the future? Should I be concerned he's going to come back to my place? All that stuff goes away when human beings talk to human beings in a room. Obviously, they got to be the right human beings, it's got to be the right case, and there has to be tremendous preparation of both sides in advance. But that, in a very nuts and bolts way, is what we're talking about. And for agreements that are not kept, there is a case that can be prosecuted. So there is an incentive for everyone to do what they have promised. And that is how we get to a good result. Now, are there any questions for any of the distinguished speakers that we have here? Yes, sir. Mr. Dean. Right. I could give you an approximate answer, but I want to make sure I'm 100% correct on this. Mr. King, you want to come forward? Jody, did you want to come forward too, or Jordan? Okay.
Thank you for your question. So currently the program is eligible for young people ages 12 through 17, and we're currently looking at offense types such as assaults, robberies, burglaries, and high-level thefts. Thanks.
Are there other questions? Might as well stay here. Might as well stay here, Jordan.
Thank you for your question. Of course. In addition to some of the offense types I previously mentioned, a few other eligibility criteria that we have is if the program did not exist, our office would charge and formally prosecute that young person, that there's an identifiable person harmed, no firearm offenses will be considered for this pilot, no sex offenses will be considered for this pilot. A previous record is not an exclusionary factor at this time, but it is taken into consideration. No domestic or intimate partner violence cases will be taken at this time for this pilot. No cases that would qualify for a direct file offense would be considered for this pilot. And that this program is most effective for offense types with ratings of misdemeanor, the first degree, or both.
So just to add to that, and I think it's important because I heard your question a little bit differently. We refer the case to Healing Futures, the program from YASP, and they do an intake interview. And a part of that intake interview process is asking them if they're willing to take responsibility for what happened. Are they willing? Because it is a program that if they were to say, no, I'm not, or I don't want to, or I didn't do it, that case would just then be returned to us, and we would move forward with the case like we would normally. But it is, the first step is them interviewing, them taking that process with them, having that conversation with them, talking with their parents, and then going from there. And if they agree to go into the program, they then reach out to the person that's been harmed, to the survivor of what the crime that they had, to ask for their participation in the program as well. So it's not a hard no. It's what the way this works is that when they talk to survivors, to victims, they explain several options to them. One is at any time, if they choose not to participate, they have that right. And that's giving agency back to them to make decisions about what's happening. They can have a surrogate. They can have a friend step in for them. They can have someone from the community, which is why this isn't just a victim offender dialogue, which some people might think. It also engages the community as a part of the process, because the harm is not just done to that person that survives that crime, but also to the community. We're all impacted when crime happens. So this is a process that allows for participation of community folks to step in for them. Well, if the person is willing to take responsibility for what happens, and then we would have our YASP would have a community surrogate step in for that person. It wouldn't be a hard no, because the goal is to have this person go through a process where they take responsibility, have a conversation perhaps with people who've experienced very similarly impacted crimes themselves, to talk about what that experience was. You wouldn't want to deny a person the opportunity to take responsibility for their actions. You wouldn't want to deny them the opportunity to experience dealing with empathy and healing, which is a part of what this process is about. And it's for the community as well as for the people directly impacted. So the end result of that is that our partner, Healing Futures, works with both people separately and together. When they come up with a plan to make it right, they're given a time period to make that right in. Once they've completed, and the Healing Futures, the partner, supports that young person in taking on the responsibility of taking those steps to make it right. And then at the end of it, there is a celebration that this has been completed, with everyone invited to that process. And then on our end, there's no warrant issued. It's closed.
Thank you. Are there other questions?
I just have one. I apologize if I missed it. Who were the 25 youth that Councilwoman Dean was talking about?
So I believe what Council Member Gim was talking about is that the pilot program will involve the selection of 25 juveniles who otherwise would be charged and otherwise would be prosecuted in some fashion in the juvenile system. I believe what the council member was suggesting is that we not follow them by name, because obviously we protect individuals' privacy. That's the whole notion of the juvenile system. But I assume what she was talking about is that we follow the progress of these 25 people, anonymized people, and we see how successful they are. If results here are anything like in Oakland, then they should be very successful. They should be more successful than any other 25 people who are brought the traditional route.
So is that the number you guys are thinking, 25?
25 for the first year, but as I said, you know, the experts in this field think it's very important that you start in a limited and very controlled and very careful way. I guess that's probably true whenever you're trying to start something brand new, but I would love to see this become 250 and become 2,500 and maybe become more than that, with more age groups included and some more offenses included. We have about 40,000 cases in Philadelphia per year, and this is the future. So we should be thinking, in my opinion, in terms of a significant chunk of future cases being appropriate for this system. No, our average number of juvenile cases in the last few years has been about 2,400. A big improvement, by the way, over many years ago. Mr. Listonbee could tell you, back when they used to have 10 to 15,000. Yeah, that's when every dust up in the schoolyard became aggravated assault under Lynn Abraham. We don't do that. All right. Well, the answer is either yes, except I don't know about it, or the answer is that's the greatest idea I've heard all day. So would someone like to address that point? Do you want to address it?
I mean, I think the goal is to, and I know that Reverend Donna has talked about this, is that we would like every neighborhood to have people that are trained in restorative justice processes and how to hold circles, to be circle keepers, to be circle holders. But in addition, we didn't mention it today, but our public school district right now, through a young man named Josh Staub, who was incidentally trained by the same folks in Oakland, is implementing restorative justice within our public school districts. There are over 100 schools who have partnered with this program, and they now have a brick and mortar where they're holding circles. They've trained about 75 of their staff to be restorative justice facilitators, and I think our hope is, and Jordan and I have talked about this, that if there is an arrest on a school, we would like to say, you have a restorative justice facilitators. You need to send this back to your restorative justice facilitators and not incur an arrest through this criminal system.
Mr. Mr. Dean, maybe I can help, and then if the council member wants to jump in. This is one of the things that's unusual here. It's not that it's being done, but this is one of the first times, maybe the first time, that a district attorney's office has initiated, as opposed to it being the outcry of community groups that have pushed for it and pushed for it and pushed for it, and eventually the wall falls down. Well, we opened the door and said, come on in. So nobody had to knock the wall down. So this is initiated by the DA's office, although similar things are going on. Council member, did you have anything?
No, perfect. I think it's notable that our DA is starting this practice here.
Is there a last question? Yes, sir.
This question is for Reverend Donna with MCCP. I heard, your initiative working with Sarah Lake outside the streets. Is there an initiative to provide training to the community outside of those that are, coming through the justice system?
Yes, definitely. Our goal is to train all Philadelphians of all ages, from the poorest to City Hall, in all of these restorative practices, so that the community can access all of these wonderful opportunities, and also that the community can support it and advocate for the expansion. Larry Krasner and his team have a goal to be able to serve, 25, 250, 2,500. The community, we have a goal not to send anybody to the program. So by doing this training in our communities, we will be able to cut things off before diversion and intervention is needed. So in this way, we're partnering with the DA's office and with others like Life Outside the Streets and SARE. And we also want to give a big shout out to YASP. We are so proud of them here in West Philly. I just have to say it, and know that this program is going to be very successful. Thank you.
All right. Is there a final question? There is no final question. Thank you all very much.